market town initiative and stuff like that seemed to have like a peak at the beginning of interest with the partnership, and then it tailed off badly, and then there's issues with keeping the interest going for long enough. When this started, are you struggling to keep people interested as it's up and running? Are you struggling to keep people interested in keeping it running?
Are you thinking of the rail part of it, or the market?
No. For the market town initiative, they had issues. That's separate, but they had issues. And I was wondering whether you had the same issues with the rail partnership, the fact that keeping people interested over a longer period of time instead of just the initial setup.
Yeah, I think, what you're pointing at is the real problems with the world of, I suppose, fragmented action and governance that we have. Projects, partnerships, funding streams, different agencies, and sustaining the finance is one of the big issues constantly, but also perhaps sustaining the rather more intangible momentum of individuals, of organisations, of keeping their interest, as you suggest. I think for purely the rail partnership, up to now, it's been relatively successful in not having a big problem. There are always question marks: are the councils going to be able to sustain the money? Particularly to allow things to be done as opposed to just the core activity. But I think the rail partnership has been quite fortunate in that respect. In terms of, say, use, so far most of the branch lines have shown a reasonably healthy rate of growth of traffic. So in that sense, people are saying quite interested. It hasn't really tailed off. But I think you're pointing at a really big, complex area there. And I know I'm all too aware, actually, of what you're talking about, the Market Coastal Towns Initiative, because I was involved in, curiously, a Market Coastal Towns Initiative here in the Tamar Valley, which hasn't got a market town, actually, but that's another story, and I could go on at some length about that problem, how you sustain it from a variety of angles, everything from literally keeping funding going after the first couple of years, getting the action plan produced, a few things like that, and no money to actually do anything, through to keeping the interest of individuals who have committed themselves at the outset. So, sorry, I don't know if I've answered that.
No, you have.
About the kind of evaluation that's done, because obviously, we've had one PhD student looking at this now, and I know you were very instrumental in getting another PhD studentship.
Yeah.
It's probably just worth saying something about
I think that's interesting,
research,
yes. Yeah. I mean, to be honest, the really honest answer is that it's actually quite difficult to be very precise about the contribution of the various things that the Rail Partnership have done with respect to its core objectives. On the one hand, there is data on increased usage of the branch lines. The general pattern has been increase of patronage, increase of revenue, but how you disentangle the contribution of a set of brochures or a PR stunt, I'm not too sure, from wider processes, because we know the national pattern is also of growth. So how far you can say, yes, we are successful, I think it's quite difficult. You can sense it in a rather, one way I suppose, is the not terribly precise idea that there's quite a lot of individuals in the partnership still feel reasonably committed to it. I mean, that's not monetary by any means, but in other words, a kind of qualitative sense that what's been happening meets with a fair amount of approval from quite a range of people. But the real answer is there hasn't probably been a really thorough process of evaluation of the work of the partnership. It's quite difficult to pin down. There are regular surveys on the trains, there are all those sort of feedback comes in, questionnaire surveys, interviews, all that kind of stuff, which guides what they do next year, perhaps with respect to promotion. But there's a gap, actually, I'm being honest there. Although obviously Jamie's been doing a lot of work, undoubtedly, and we are intent now on starting up another PhD, which will look rather more at the whole business of community rail in the southwest and possibly beyond that. But there's a certain degree, and I don't know if this probably doesn't sound very impressive at all, but there's a certain degree of faith in the whole process, really. Optimism, rather than necessarily hard-headed. You could probably find ways of suggesting that it's not cost-effective. It still does require subsidy. All of these branch lines do. but how you value perhaps the way that what has happened. I mean, just an example, sorry I'm rambling slightly here, but quite recently one of the little experiments that have been tried by people working the rail partnership is getting single mothers who live in pretty poor area of Plymouth alongside the railway station to try the train. Some of them have never been on a train ever, and they couldn't get this particular group found it quite difficult to get out at all with their little kids, and we organised a sort of trip for them and took them as a group up to Gunnislake, down to Calstock, and they had a great time. You know, but how you put a value on that, I'm not sure. I'm sure there are many who can, who are skilled in these things, can afford evaluation. What I'm saying is a lot of the outcomes are somewhat intangible, they're qualitative. So I'm not answering your question probably there, Stuart, but
No, I think it's an important point though, isn't it? That, I mean, I know, you know, talk to people. A friend of mine who's an economist with used to be for DFT, Department for Transport, and he would look at the numbers using the line and probably make a purely economic judgment on that.
yeah.
But what you're talking about is a social issue, which you cannot really put an economic value on, which I think is very important. And hopefully, you know, the future research that you and I and John Shaw will try and investigate that. Any other questions?
Do you find yourself being given the rubbish rolling stock?
Well, I mean, do the local rail operators get that? Relatively, yes, I suppose. The southwest as a whole does, I think. The whole region hasn't really been a major priority for providing, enough rolling stock. One of the problems in the summer is there's a shortage of rolling stock, really. It's rather difficult to expand the services, including on the main line. There's scope to probably promote more, but there just is a limited amount of rolling stock. And although it's not that bad, if you haven't got much, if something breaks down, then you're left with a gap in the service, and people think that that's a problem and so forth. So it can be a bit of a... You can get that sense. We don't get up this line, we don't have those things called pacers, which have returned to Exeter. Do you know the ones I mean? The shorter trains, which are usually regarded as at the bottom of the heap when it comes to quality. But they're going to be using those the next year, even as going up to Bunstable, but they won't come up this line. And there's also, in the longer term, there's not even a hint of new rolling stock. So the assumption is we're going to have to keep these things going for as long as possible. Yeah, so it's yes and no, I suppose. It could be worse, but it could be better, definitely.
Right, okay. Well, I'm very grateful, Clive, for you giving up some of your Sunday afternoon to talk to us. I think it's a really interesting example, this one. And, you know, for those of you who will stay in the southwest to work, you may even have some contact with the DCRP because, as you say, it's got lots of different partners. So keep an eye on it. And obviously there's research that's going to be going on in Plymouth's Geography Department and our Geography Department as well. So it's quite a nice localised example, especially of bringing tourism and transport together, because a lot of the DCRP's work is about promoting tourism within the context of